My father evicted me from the family residence to accommodate my half-brother, Derek, who is 24 years of age. 6 months later, Derek and I are in communication regarding a criminal act that Derek committed, and I am considering providing false information to the authorities. I recently reached the age of 18, and my father evicted me from the family home approximately 4 months ago. The reason for this eviction was that Derek decided to move back to the family residence. He was unwilling to rent an apartment like a normal person and instead sought to live with my father. Derek is my father's son from his first relationship, but Derek's mother and my father divorced shortly after he was born, resulting in a lack of a strong relationship between them. Derek is considerably closer to my father than he was close to his mother, so we spent a great deal of time together during our formative years. He would frequently visit, often more often than legally required under the terms of his custody arrangement. I believe that he was supposed to spend half of each month with my father, but I distinctly recall being around him constantly, or perhaps that was simply my perception. It is possible that my brain is exaggerating things because I disliked spending time with him. However, it is also possible that my father forced us to spend time together. I am aware that he did not like me much and saw me as a threat to him. My mother passed away a couple of years ago after a long battle with lung cancer. This was when things started going downhill with me. My father and I have had a troubled relationship since my childhood. It is unclear whether he did not want a child like me or whether he simply did not want children at all. Regardless, he treated me in a peculiar manner when I was young, and it often felt as though he did not want me around. My father would frequently express anger and frustration with me for minor infractions, and he consistently demonstrated a lack of affection. Even when I attempted to gain his approval, he would respond with indifference. In contrast, Derek was a markedly different figure. When Derek was present, my father would suddenly exhibit a different demeanor, one that was more affectionate and engaging. He was the epitome of a loving father and would do anything for me. He would even force us to spend time together, despite our initial reluctance. Derek's dislike for me stemmed from the fact that I posed a threat to him. Similarly, I disliked him because he would often resort to bullying tactics when I was a child. He would consistently attempt to engage in conflict with me and intimidate me on a regular basis, simply because he could. He was aware that he would likely escape any consequences for his actions, given that my father would never intervene on my behalf when I voiced my concerns about Derek's aggressive behavior towards me. Instead, he would advise me to suck it up and deal with it. I was socialized to accept this behavior as typical of boys and was discouraged from developing a more sensitive and passive demeanor. I internalized this expectation and eventually learned to tolerate the mistreatment without retaliating, as I was afraid of offending my father. The act of fighting with Derek served as a convenient means of eliciting a verbal reprimand from my father. It was irrelevant whether Derek was responsible for causing me distress or not. If I engaged in a physical altercation with him, I was invariably perceived as the aggressor. My father's perspective was that the narrative was irrelevant. Whatever transpired, I was the perpetrator. It was evident that he had a favored child, and I was the one he favored least. It is evident that my father did not perceive my situation as problematic. Despite the age difference of 6 years, he did not view Derek's actions as unusual. As time passed, he began to alter his approach to bullying me, recognizing that physical violence was ineffective. Additionally, as I entered adolescence, he shifted his tactics. He began to bully me with his friends instead. Prior to that, the school had been my safe haven because I was still in elementary school when he was in middle school. Our buildings were separate, so he could not reach me there. However, once I started middle school, we were in the same building, and he and his friends began to gang up on me. They would taunt me and make fun of me on a regular basis. They would even spread false rumors about me, claiming that I was mentally challenged. The seniors at the school knew that I was Derek's younger brother, and they would often refer to me as such. They would even use slurs to refer to me. Furthermore, this social ostracism made it challenging for me to navigate the social dynamics of middle school. During this period, adolescents tend to prioritize their reputation, leading to instances where even my elementary school friends avoided me due to my perceived lack of social status. It was not until Derek graduated that I finally had the opportunity to establish my own social circle. I was able to attend school without the constant fear of being ostracized. I did have a few friends, but most people believed the falsehoods they told about me. I would often let them get away with it because I was so exhausted from constantly defending myself that I could not even bear to argue with people at home. Things were just as bad as ever because Derek and my father would frequently take advantage of opportunities to belittle me and make me feel inferior. The most amusing aspect of this was that I was not, in fact, an idiot. I had achieved respectable academic results and demonstrated considerable aptitude in science. However, my father and Derek were indifferent to these achievements. Derek was a talented football player, a fact that further undermined my self-esteem. He was, in fact, a remarkably proficient student. It is evident that the circumstances at home were particularly challenging for me. Derek embodied the qualities that my father had sought in a son, exhibiting both athleticism and academic prowess. In contrast, I was perceived as average in every respect. He was relentless in his attempts to remind me of my lack of significance. My mother attempted to defend me, but my father was a skilled persuader, convincing her that their words were mere jests and that they did not intend any harm. My mother was generally a kind and gentle person, but she was also deeply in love with my father, which made it difficult for her to see him for what he truly was. She would try her best to defend me, but it was not enough, and my father and Derek continued to bully me for as long as they could. She was a kind and gentle person, but she was also deeply in love with my father. Consequently, she failed to recognize his true nature. She would often attempt to defend me, and I was grateful for her efforts. However, her attempts were ultimately ineffective, as my father and Derek continued to harass me for as long as they could. Eventually, with Derek's departure for college, I experienced a sense of reprieve. While my father remained in the household, his interactions with me became markedly less vexatious in the absence of his sibling. However, before I could ascertain the nuances of coexisting with my parents in the absence of Derek's relentless taunting, my mother was diagnosed with lung cancer. It was a challenging period for us as a family, as we struggled to come to terms with the diagnosis. We felt a sense of loss and fragmentation within our family structure. My father and I shared a strong bond, as we both loved our mother deeply. Her diagnosis had a significant impact on us, but instead of uniting our family, it led to further division and conflict. My father's response to the situation was to exacerbate the difficulties. My mother was already experiencing distress, yet instead of providing support, he began to withdraw. Previously, he would at least communicate with me, albeit in a critical manner. However, following my mother's diagnosis, he ceased all communication and interaction, effectively ignoring me. I can understand his actions to a certain extent, given the circumstances. However, I would have preferred if my mother's situation had brought us closer together. It was a predestined outcome, and even if it was meant to be, my father was the kind of person who would ensure that it did not occur. For some reason, he harbored animosity towards me and was unable to tolerate my happiness. As my mother's condition deteriorated, my father's temper also began to affect me, as he either chose to remain silent and ignore me entirely or he would engage in highly disagreeable behavior, on numerous occasions nearly eliciting tears from me due to his discourteous conduct. I endeavored to maintain familial harmony by refraining from responding to my father's actions, cognizant that such a response would only serve to provoke him further. This provided further motivation for him to berate me and pick on me during the years that my mother was sick. Whenever he would return home from college, he would refrain from mistreating me. While this was appreciated, it was not enough to make up for the lack of human decency he displayed. Things were particularly difficult and my mother was alive. Despite the death of my mother, I continued to experience a significant degree of distress. In the initial months following her passing, the household remained largely silent, with my father appearing to withdraw from social interaction. While I assumed the majority of domestic responsibilities, he would occasionally attend to basic tasks, such as going to work and returning home. I would prepare dinner and perform other household tasks, but there was no further interaction. I was concerned about my father's well-being and contacted my grandparents on several occasions to express my concerns. However, they did not take my observations seriously. It appeared that they either lacked the motivation or the capacity to monitor their son's well-being after the funeral. Like me, my father simply disregarded my advice and continued to behave in a manner that was detrimental to his own well-being. After a few months, however, he began to exhibit signs of improvement. Unfortunately, This also included binge drinking and making me feel ashamed of myself. He would frequently order me to perform various tasks around the house, which was extremely exhausting. It was a considerable burden, as in addition to my studies, I was also responsible for the domestic tasks that my mother had previously undertaken. Even when she was unwell, my father and I were able to manage these duties. However, following her demise, I was left with the sole responsibility of carrying out these tasks. I was unable to object, as if I did, my father would have simply stated that I was not contributing financially to the household. My father would assert that I was not generating any income, and therefore this was the minimum I could do to maintain my residence. This was a highly insulting assertion, but I had no alternative accommodation, and therefore had no choice but to accept the situation. For an extended period, my only source of optimism was the prospect of attending college, as this would have enabled me to establish an independent life. I was eager to emancipate myself from my father's influence and to cease residing in this domicile. I no longer regarded this place as my true home. Had my mother not passed away, I would have relocated and taken up residence with my maternal grandparents. However, they reside at a considerable distance, and I was still obliged to complete one academic year, rendering this option impractical. It was only a couple of months ago that my father discovered that his favored child would be returning home and subsequently expelled me from the residence. I relocated to live with my grandparents. Derek had departed for college a couple of years prior but had not returned to reside here after graduation. He secured employment in the area and elected to remain due to his girlfriend's desire to establish a life apart from their familial home. Consequently, Derek opted he would only come back for the holidays occasionally. About 2 years ago, he married his girlfriend because she was pregnant. They had just graduated when they found out, and it seemed like pretty perfect timing, so they decided to get married. I was invited to the wedding, surprisingly, and just for that one day. He did not terrorize me. My mother was also present, despite her condition was a factor in his decision to marry her. Despite his reservations, he found my mother agreeable, and he had a distant relationship with his own mother, who was perceived as neglectful. I mention this because she was the kind of mother who did not prioritize her children or maintain a relationship with them. By the time Derek married, she had already been married 4 times. It appeared to me that her primary objective in life was to accumulate wealth. She worked and earned her own money, but that came at the cost of her relationship with her son. This may explain why Derek was so attached to our father. He had only one parent who cared about him, and he did not want to share that parent with me. My father married and had a child shortly after, and they have been living happily together for the past 2 decades. Her primary objective in life was to accumulate wealth. She worked and earned her own money, but this came at the expense of her relationship with her son. This may explain why Derek was so attached to our father. He had only one parent who cared about him, and he did not want to share that parent with me. Dad got married and soon after had a child. They have been living happily together for the past 2 years. It has been several years, but I am uncertain as to why. Approximately 6 months ago, they made the decision to move back. My father informed me of this approximately 2 weeks before Derek was scheduled to return home. He was quite smug about it as well, and he sat me down one day and told me that I needed to find a place to live because Derek would be returning home and that I would have to give up my room. We had 3 bedrooms, so I asked him why they could not simply use the guest room. He informed me that Derek and his wife would be residing in the guest room and that I would be required to vacate my room, which was to be converted into a nursery. He asserted that I was no longer needed at home, as I was about to become an adult in a few months. I felt that this was an unnecessary and selfish demand, particularly given that I was already an adult in the eyes of the law. I was instructed to move back to my father's house with my family. I attempted to negotiate with him, but he was unresponsive. He informed me that I had 2 weeks to clear out, and if I did not leave, he would call the police. I was aware that there might be a legal avenue to challenge this decision, but at the time, I was overwhelmed and did not consider it. I was stricken because I did not trust my father and I was aware that he was fully capable of kicking me out without notice. Consequently, I began to search for a place to live, but eventually settled on moving in with my grandparents. This was an option I had previously avoided because they lived a considerable distance away and I still had to attend school. At the time, I had no other viable alternatives and there were just a couple of weeks of high school left, so I was willing to take that risk. On the day in question, I had relocated from the residence in question due to my desire to avoid being present when Derek returned home with his wife and child. My father did not express any concern regarding my departure and did not even bid me farewell on the day that I had packed my belongings and was preparing to leave with the moving company. My grandparents had traveled to the residence in question to collect me and were prepared to engage in a physical altercation with my father. However, I intervened and advised them against such an action, as it would not be beneficial to the situation. 6 months have passed since that day, and I have been residing elsewhere. Since my father kicked me out, I have not been in touch with my grandparents. I did not intend to resume communication with him. I was scheduled to begin college in a few weeks, and that was already arranged. I had no motivation to speak with my father or Derek again. However, they were the ones who initiated contact because something had occurred and they needed my assistance. They visited me a few days ago. I was somewhat taken aback by their overture, as I had not anticipated such a gesture. Nevertheless, my grandparents extended an invitation, and I deemed it prudent to engage in discourse with them. Upon further inquiry, I learned that Derek had returned with his family due to the loss of his employment, which had precipitated financial difficulties. Consequently, he had opted to relocate to this area, despite his wife's initial reservations. At this juncture, it is necessary to pause and reflect on the circumstances that led to Derek's return to his hometown. The couple were both homemakers who had chosen not to work until their child was a little older. When they returned to the workforce, they expected to find employment easily, but that was not the case. There were no vacancies at the time, and people with Derek's skill set were in high demand. It is important to note that I was not a particularly outstanding candidate for the position. However, my father was able to secure employment for me in the company where I currently work. Neither of us was particularly pleased with this arrangement, as the remuneration was somewhat less than what I had been earning previously. However, we were forced to accept this situation, as we had no alternative. It transpired that Derek had been engaged in criminal activity on behalf of the company for a period of several months. This was only brought to light a few weeks ago, resulting in the current predicament of my father and Derek, who are now facing legal action from their employers on the grounds of conspiracy and threat of litigation. If the funds are not returned in a timely manner, the only reason that a lawsuit has not yet been filed is because the company is a family business. The CEO of the company, who is also a personal friend of my mother, has not yet initiated legal action against them for embezzlement. However, this is not due to any lack of inclination to do so. I was asked to delay the return of the money for an extended period. My father and Derek wanted me to claim that the funds were needed for my college education, which is why they had been embezzling. I was instructed to portray this as a personal sacrifice on their part, rather than a selfish act. My father believed that this would persuade them to be lenient towards us and allow them more time to repay the money. They would still face consequences, but at least they would not be imprisoned. They were counting on me to help them present a convincing narrative of being a poor, innocent victim. I was unable to believe that they would ask me to do something so audacious. Given the manner in which they had treated me throughout my life, I rejected the proposal almost immediately, without even considering it. I deemed the plan to be absurd and unfeasible. I was not willing to be a part of it when I informed them of my decision. They began to become increasingly agitated, and informed me that I was obliged to assist them, as there was a significant possibility that they might be incarcerated. I was unwilling to allow a trivial grievance from years ago to have such a detrimental impact on their lives. Consequently, I informed them that the grievance was not trivial. Furthermore, the incident in question was not a long-standing one. My father had only recently expelled me, and I had not yet reached the 1-year mark since that time. However, this was not the primary reason for my refusal to assist them. Instead, I perceived their plan to be fundamentally dishonest. I was acquainted with the individual in question, as previously stated. My mother and he were close friends, and he also appeared to hold a positive regard for me. They had grown up together, and I would refer to him as my uncle whenever he would visit, even at my mother's funeral. We engaged in a cordial discourse and developed a mutual affinity. My mother was the individual who had advised him to offer my father a position in his company when my father was experiencing financial difficulties. Instead of expressing gratitude, Derek opted to ridicule these individuals. My father, in turn, attempted to deflect responsibility by using me as a shield. I found this to be a particularly distasteful tactic, and I could not in good conscience be complicit in this scheme. I informed them that it would be in their best interest to simply attempt to rectify the situation by paying the amount that they had stolen, rather than attempting to cover it up with further lies. I informed them that I would not be on their side in this matter and that they might end up going to jail if they attempted to deceive him again. In fact, they should have been grateful that they were being given the opportunity to pay the money off and to extricate themselves from this situation without the threat of a lawsuit, which they would almost certainly lose and which would irreparably damage their future prospects. They were unaware of the simplicity of their current circumstances and the potential complications that might arise if they proceeded with their ill-advised plan. I attempted to explain this to them, but my father became enraged and he stated that he was not interested in hearing a sermon from me and that if I wished to assist them, I would agree to their plan rather than offering them advice that was of no consequence. I informed him that I was not willing to be involved in this matter and, to my surprise, my father began to cry. I had never witnessed such an emotional response from him. This had occurred previously, and I found it to be a highly disconcerting experience. He informed me that he had been relying on me because I was his son. He stated that, regardless of past events, he would have provided assistance if I were in a similar situation. He expressed his expectation that I would extend the same support, emphasizing the significant nature of the situation and his reluctance to participate. Derek also expressed a similar sentiment, imploring me to assist them due to his awareness that I was well liked among my mother's friends and the only individual capable of assisting them. Had my mother been alive, she would have facilitated a resolution, but since her absence, I was the next best person to address the situation. They were counting on me, and while it was challenging, I still had to decline their request. I attempted to persuade them to confess and repay the debt they owed. However, they became visibly distressed and asserted that my refusal to assist them was due to my past mistreatment at their hands. They expressed disappointment with my current approach and departed. I continue to reflect on this incident, grappling with the emotional distress it has caused. I am plagued by the image of them in jail. It is not a comfortable thought, yet I am reluctant to become complicit in an illicit and immoral enterprise. I am conflicted about my role in this situation, particularly given that I would be exploiting my mother's friendship and manipulating a person she holds in high regard. I am uncertain about the best course of action. The situation at hand is not one that lends itself to prolonged negotiations. My father and Derek have a limited time frame in which to settle their financial obligations. Ida's refusal to lie and cover up for my father and my half-brother, who have been my tormentors throughout my life, is understandable. However, I have decided that I will not provide them with assistance. Not only is this morally and ethically questionable, but it is also illegal. I do not wish to be complicit in their actions. If my father and Derek wish to avoid incarceration, they must resolve this matter independently. It is not as if they are facing imminent danger, they have been offered the chance to rectify the situation, repay the funds they embezzled, and emerge unscathed. They may choose to accept this resolution. The resolution of this matter is within their power to effect, and thus I have no reason to feel guilty. The majority of comments on this forum have advised me to refrain from involvement, not only because my father and Derek were reprehensible individuals, but also because their actions were morally repugnant. I would be unable to reconcile myself with this situation and move on with my life as they would be able to do. It is evident that we are not on the same moral plane. We are not of the same disposition, and I would not engage in such an action. Therefore, I have elected to refrain from involvement. Should they contact me subsequent to this declaration, I will block them. For the record, they are already blocked everywhere. However, I am aware that they may utilize alternative numbers or social media accounts to reach me. My grandparents also believe that I am acting appropriately. By abstaining from involvement in this situation, I am demonstrating that I do not condone the actions that led to this unfortunate state of affairs. It is therefore unreasonable to expect me to take any further action, given the way I have been treated by those involved for an extended period of time. Update 2. My father has contacted me via text message, as I had anticipated. It has been 8 days since he last visited, and we have not spoken since then, as previously stated. He has used a different number to contact me. I did not recognize the number that called me, and I answered it only briefly. As soon as I picked up the call, I ended it, having recognized my father's voice on the other end. However, I was somewhat slow in blocking him, which allowed him to text me. I received the text, in which he stated that he was aware that I did not wish to discuss the matter further. Derek and I were in significant difficulty and required assistance from me because our employer was exerting pressure on us daily to return the funds or face legal action. I felt a sense of guilt, but I sent him a text message stating that I would not be providing him with assistance. He should consider alternative methods for returning the money. I chose to avoid the issue by blocking him. I hoped that he would understand my position, even if he did not agree with it. I simply hoped that he would act in a responsible manner. I would prefer not to have a father in prison. Update 3. I have not yet heard from my father, but my grandparents informed me that they had contacted my mother's friend. The CEO was asked to inquire as to his intended course of action. Prior to this, contact had not been made because the individual in question is a busy man and it was deemed inadvisable to attempt to persuade him. However, it was necessary to ascertain the situation, and to speak to my father or Derek was no longer a viable option. Consequently, my grandfather spoke to him and was informed that he was still intending to file a lawsuit if the money was not returned within a couple of months. A few months later, he informed us that he was willing to let the matter rest, citing his friendship with my mother. However, he remained unwilling to forgive the debt. I respected his willingness to be more lenient than most people in a similar situation. He even apologized to me and expressed regret for the situation. I believe that the matter will be resolved in due course. My father is probably aware that he should repay the debt in some way, as he does not wish to end up in jail. It will take some time, but I am confident that he will do so. I also had a lengthy conversation with my mother's friend, who informed me that my mother had spoken to him before her passing and said that he would always be available to help me if I needed it. This is a reassuring thought. I also had a lengthy conversation with my mother's friend, who informed me that my mother had spoken to him before her passing. She had advised him that if I ever needed to find temporary employment or a more permanent position, his door would always be open. This is a reassuring piece of information that I will bear in mind in the future, even after my mother's death. It is comforting to know that she is still looking out for me and that I can rely on her support.